Good morning, folks, or afternoon, as we just move over through the noon. So, last video, speaking about the font of spiritual wisdom, or so it claims, is now merging abortion as acceptable in the eyes of the Gospels, Christ, the new laws. How the heck can they do this kind of stuff? What is it that, how can these institutions invert things just like that? Well, obviously it's not an instant thing, it's a slow build-up. The Zionists got in because of the Schofield Bible, copyright owned by Oxford University Press, rewritten and edited after the Six-Day War in 1967. Yeah, so that's a flowing piece of lies, is the Schofield Bible, and that's what's entrapped Christianity into the Zionist creed. Now, as I've said before, I'm not a religious guy, and I can't also claim to be a theological expert. I'm not. But when I approach certain doctrines, I study them for myself, and I take what I see, not what other people say you should, how you should understand or something. When you actually apply yourself to these doctrines, instead of carrying forward and editing the program you've been given, things do start to make sense. Really, it makes sense. And so we're left with, why is it so important that the priesthood gets rid of not only the Gospels, which it despises, but also the Torah? It's pretty simple, really. It's because the Torah, when understood, helps you to understand what the Gospels are and why that raft of body of law is important. Now, just to give a fine example of where the whole thing has gone off track, we can do no better than look at the real meaning to the term Sabbath. Because the Sabbath is in the Ten Commandments, okay, that you must keep it. So, that being the case, there is a law ordained by God. Now, why am I saying that? I'll tell you why. If you get back into the doctrinal history and the essence of it, the only laws that were put into the Ark of the Covenant were the Ten Commandments. So what that's telling you is that is God's law and nothing else. Now, where you get all the rest of the nonsense from, and which is why you can see the Old Testament heading further and further into hell in the mechanics of how the people are understanding things, is because they followed the Mosaic law, or the law set out by Moses to create the religion. So here's where you get the inner circle, outer circle nonsense. So the inner circle body of law to which everything is supposed to stand under is the Ten Commandments. Nothing else. It's Genesis, isn't it, where it says the creation was 6 days and then the seventh was a rest. So naturally, the Mosaic law then presents that and formulates that into a mechanic by which they can control people. They've besmirched what the commandment to keep the Sabbath means and formulated it into a method by which they can use it to control people in a religion. Because the doctrine's one thing, religion is another. And just because these religions claim to be based in the doctrine, if you don't take a good look for yourself, then that is possibly going to be the format on which you operate. When you take what I've said is the Ten Commandments are the only body of law ordained by God, everything else was Mosaic law, and that the entrance of Jesus, as it were, which was prophesied in the Torah, which is why the priesthood needs to get rid of the Torah as well as the Gospels. What you can see there is that he is removing the Mosaic law. So all the nonsense that had been built up from the time of Moses to the time of Jesus, He nailed the Mosaic law on the cross. That's what we're getting going, disappearing. All the nonsense that goes in with the religion centered around the temple. Okay, that's what he nailed on the cross. So that the only laws instituted from that time were the Ten Commandments. Because if you look at the entire Gospels, they are based entirely around the Ten Commandments, not the Mosaic law. This is why the priesthood can't stand the Gospels, because it cancels out the Mosaic law, not the Ten Commandments. It reinforces the Ten Commandments, everything in the Gospels. So, just as a bit of an insight into the deception played by the priesthood and creating the shadow, which is what religion is. Yeah, so religion is the shadow based around, it claims, the Ten Commandments. What they do is obfuscate the Ten Commandments and put into an whole raft of other nonsense that they can create the courts for to administer. And of course, being the priesthood, they're making money out of that off you, which is why the money tables were turned. The money exchange and the temple are two separate things. The temple's supposed to be spiritual. Money and all that goes with it is temporal. The two should not be in the same mix. Yeah, so there shouldn't be a basket being handed around in the churches. You know, when I was a youngster and I used to visit my cousins who were being brought up under the staunch Catholic doctrine, I used to go to the church with them purposely. A, to have a look, and B, the main thing I did there was point out the nonsense of the money basket. Because what I soon saw immediately, basically, was that this basket with the coin was the most important part of this church service. You could see that pretty quickly, that the money was the most important thing. And then into the congregation, that pan says, well, I gave more, I'm giving more. It creates this idea in your own mind that God's watching you give more money. No, that isn't the way. They're separate. Okay, you've got Caesar and you've got spirituality. Completely different things, which is why you're told, render to Caesar that which is Caesar, etc. Okay, old-time English Christianity held that tight because the biggest bootleggers were the vicars and the rabbis. Yeah, so you can see there they were operating absolutely. Screw Caesar, you can keep it. This is ours. Yeah, so that's Methodism changed that format from operating according to the Gospels to being a slave in the Industrial Revolution for Jesus. So that's the Methodist construct, which they managed to get in there through the Sunday schools, push it into the kids, away you go. So this is how they managed to get the Zionist creed slowly, surely operating while still claiming to be for Jesus. So if we go back to the point of this, which is religion teaches you that the Sabbath is all about a day. So if you're Masonic, it's Thursday. If you're a Muslim, it's Friday. If you are a Jew, it's Saturday. And if you're taking the Christian religion, it's a Sunday. So those days have been created by the religion, who then claim it's the Sabbath. Now that's contrary to understanding the concept of keeping the Sabbath solely in the Ten Commandments, because what the rest, the 6 days, the 7 days is about, has got absolutely nothing to do with it being a day of the week. That is entirely within the shadow, the Mosaic nonsense, which forms religion. What Genesis is actually teaching you is this. You've been born, and your work for yourself in this time you've got is to bring yourself in tune with God's law, the Ten Commandments, right? That's the work. That is the work allotted to each and every single one of us. The Sabbath is the day that arrives when and if you complete that work while you are in this body down here. So if you are taking your sustenance from the religion, which is the Mosaic law, you are completely and utterly off the real path and in the hands of the fruit bats. Okay? The fruit bats that have now said it's fine for abortion to be in the mix and for you to take the product of it as a vaccine. Okay, this is what's happening. You can see that it's never God's law or the actual doctrine that's at fault. It's the fact that people have forsaken the study themselves in order this shadow group can tell them. All right. So the Sabbath, if you want to keep the Sabbath holy, you have to spend your life moving to put yourself in tune with the law. And the law are the 10 Commandments, because they were the only body of law placed in the ark. Everything else was secondary. Not of God, but of man. So Jesus came along, pinned the Mosaic law to the cross, said, forget that, you don't need it. We're back to the 10 Commandments, because he was enforcing the law. And the Gospels are built entirely around the 10 Commandments, not the Mosaic law. So that cancels out the Mosaic law. It doesn't cancel out the 10 Commandments, because that's the only thing that Moses interacted with God for, is for those laws. Everything else he created himself. Even his wife, when you study the history of Moses, we're scolding him often. Do you think they're all stupid? You can't get away with that. So it's pretty obvious that he was formulating his own body of nonsense to create a religion. Yeah? So the idea of the Sabbath is this. You keep the Sabbath holy by striving throughout your life to bring yourself in tune with the law. Once that's achieved, then you've earned your day of rest. You've earned your day of rest because you're no longer battling all that's false in order you can keep yourself moving in tune with what is true. The 10 Commandments, the laws of the Creator, who was issued them forth as the only backdrop in relation to how you create in this world. So this is why they're going mad against Christianity. They have to get rid of that first, but they also have to get rid of the Torah, which is why the Noahide platform is being installed, which is 7 laws. So even on that, by definition of removing 3 laws, they believe they have the power over God to remove 3 of his laws, the only laws in the Ark of the Covenant, okay? So it's not about Saturday. It's not about Friday, Thursday, or Sunday. That's the shadow. The Sabbath, you keep it holy if you are constantly working throughout your life to become within the 10 Commandments, and therefore you are in the image of God as a creator. It's profound, is that. It's profound because it's a trap and a deception. Yeah, it's a deception. Because a big part of how this priesthood has managed to co-opt the Christian was by battering into his mind that in worshipping on a Sunday, you're not keeping the Sabbath. It's been a major factor in how the priesthood has pulled the Protestant and today the remnants of the Catholic, or not so much Catholic, the church-going Catholics, the church-going Protestants. Because what's pretty clear is the Protestant church is completely under Vatican II, which is under the Noahide system. So I hope that just gives you an insight into showing you where the crutch of the deception is. It's the entire raft of religion is dealing in the shadow or the Mosaic law. It's not dealing with the laws of God, because anything that wasn't inside the Ark of the Covenant isn't of God, it's of the man Moses, or took Moses, if you go with some of the backtracing of bloodlines as to who these patriarchs are. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that the patriarchs were actually Egyptian pharaohs, But that's for another story. Basically, what this is, just to show that, if you're obsessed with the day of the week as being the Sabbath, you've completely misunderstood the whole concept of that commandment. And therefore, you are off the path. You are in the position that they all were before Jesus did his work. You're operating in the shadow. You're not operating in accordance with the laws dished out by the higher creator, as it were. So it's not about Thursday, Friday, Saturday or Sunday at all. It's about striving. The work is about your striving to put yourself within the correct format of law so you can be a divine creator, as it were. And it's not resting, not giving up the work until you've achieved that. Then you've achieved the Sabbath. You are able to rest in your battle in order to put yourself within the law. And that's basically the crutch of Genesis. So you can see what religion's done. It's turned it into its own physical nonsense when really you're dealing with the laws as commanded by the higher realms for us to obey. And if we obey them, we're within the law. It doesn't matter whether you're breaching Mosaic nonsense. That's just a body of rules and legislation in order the priesthood can control you. The priesthood can tell you how it is. The priesthood can make money off you. It goes back to the Catholic Church when I used to go there with my cousins. I would not release the basket in the Mass and World War VI would commence. That's how important the money changing was in the Catholic Church, and I'm going back into the 1970s. Yeah, and that me, back then, as a young kid, people saw me as some kind of evil when really I was saying, look, that's where your obsession is. That's where your pride is. This money basket. Because you should have seen some chaos that I caused just by not giving them the basket. Yeah? You would think I had just put Jesus on the cross. Everybody left the Catholic Church in the 70s and early 80s because it started to promote authority and not love. So I was just preempting that slowly. But it's money. There is no money within the Ten Commandments. That's all the shadow and nonsense and garbage. And which is why we're in such a mess today. Because you're dealing in the shadow and then you're dealing with those that control the shadow. They're arbitrating and they're telling you how it is. But most importantly, they want your money. They want your money, they want your obedience, and they want you to keep talking because it's an intelligence network. This is how they find out who's what, where and when. They've got telephones now, so it's far easier. But in the old school, which is what we're shifting out of, these religions are intelligence networks. And they're there to fleece you and command you. All right. So I hope that is a little bit helpful, because once you start to grasp that insight in relation to just a simple commandment, and how the shadow has misrepresented that and turned it into something they control to divide you. See, the division doesn't come in your race or it comes in your cultural programming. There is the division. If we all look at the Ten Commandments and look at them in that way, there is no division between race. Do you understand? We're just all looking at that and trying to apply ourselves by whatever means we want. But ultimately, the divisions that we all have stem entirely from the religious programming that you've had. And when you can understand that those religions are set up by the priesthood, which ultimately controls them all, to control you, to keep you divided, because keeping you divided, you have to have an enemy. If you want to become a font of essential necessity, you have to create a position of whereby all those that you're classing as under you need you. So you have to create an enemy. And by creating these separate religions, you create instant enemies for all the children born within your catchment. So what we have to break, if you want to become a man, a biblical man, as I pap on about all this time, is to have the capacity to understand that the only rules on the table are those that were put in the ark, the Ten Commandments. Everything else is based in Mosaic law and the nonsense, the absolute pish and nonsense that came from Moses. And that's what was stuck on the cross. the Mosaic law, in order they could reintroduce again the Ten Commandments and show you that that's it. And the Gospels are based on the Ten Commandments. This is why it's despised. It's despised because it cancels out the shadow. It cancels out the falsehood when you understand that concept and apply yourself in that manner. You are not in sin or evil if you're not obeying religion. You're off the mark if you're not obeying the Ten Commandments. Do you know what I mean? Because the Ten Commandments are the method by which we can create a balanced society. All else is skewed because it's moving power into a particular block that does nothing but grow and expand and grow, because it's the shadow and it's not operating according to the law, so it has to create a massive network around itself of statutes and legislation so it can protect itself without the need to obey those commandments. And that's what we've built globally today. The shadow is what's running this new world order. The shadow is what's insisting on all this command and control through your obsession with technology. They're now depending on this 5G system being installed and readying. If you now, from this moment, decided, I'm never going to take my phone out for short journeys. So if you're going into town, don't take your phone. If you're going shopping, don't take your phone. Okay? Don't take your phone. That system dies. They can have it all set up and moving, but if you've not got your little telephone with you when you're moving around in the towns, it's not working. It's not accumulating data. It's not being allowed to play out. So these are the ways you would counteract this system now, without having to uproot yourself, change your entire lifestyle, everything. Just don't take your phone out with you on your little day-to-day. That would collapse their games immediately. I mean, everything, as we've said, is based in these apps for your telephone. Just don't take it out. Don't give the outside access to your telephone, so keep the Wi-Fi off your telephone and the Bluetooth off your telephone. That scuppers it. It's simple. It's very easy to do. But to understand the concept there, you've got to understand this basic, how they've obfuscated the facts and created a falsehood that they call religion. And now everybody thinks that it's the religion that we've to obey. And it's not. It's the Ten Commandments. That's all. That is what we're taught to obey. And if we're not, that's your measure. How far off you are. Off the laws of God and into the shadow system. We need to look at it like this now. Look at what the Vatican's just put out there, and look at the picture, the image on the front of the video I've put up. That's an event that took place. That's filth porn. If they did that in front of me in a strip show, I'd be like, that's not right. It's twisted. You with me? Look at the picture. That's twisted shit. And again, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The head of the Catholic Church has never been called the Pope officially. The Pope, there's two popes officially. There is the head of the Coptic Church, that is his title, and there's the head of the Jesuits. So, keep that in mind. He's called the Vicar of Christ. You don't see that anymore. You don't, because you've got a Pope in. Yeah, and if they've called themselves popes throughout the centuries, is it not the case then that they're actually showing you that they were of the Jesuits, not of Christendom? Even though, as we've said in this, Christendom as an institution has been falling off the Ten Commandments since its inception. Because it's the shadow. It's trying to come to terms and compute Mosaic law. You can't. It's impossible, because at some point you'll come full circle and realise that it's off the law. It's off the biblical law, which is only the Ten Commandments. Now, doesn't that make that life easy? Doesn't that make it very easy to come to terms with spirituality, when you don't have to go into the nonsense, listen to the idiots and obey their shit? Handing the money. You're handing money over. That's all they're interested in, the money. and the control. The money and the control. And because you're in it, they can judge you. You're not being judged by God, you're being judged by that. Those idiots, the people that operate in that shadow system. You're never going to feel comfortable. The real meaning of the Sabbath has nothing to do with the day of the week. Okay, that's the nonsense. The guts of the story being told in that parable is your work down here doesn't rest until you've put yourself in tune with the laws of God. You are then in the image of God, you're in the sight of God, and your works will be blessed. When you've fulfilled that work in yourself, you are on the Sabbath. That is the day of rest. And it's not a day as in one day. The days in the biblical terms can be ages sometimes. It depicts it different. The understanding we have of the term day is not the same as they used back in those times. And they're misusing that. That's how the religion operates. It misuses that and pretends that this is what it meant. Like now, they're changing statute, they're changing words, redefining words. That is how they do this. This is how the shadow system operates to obfuscate the laws, but keeping you believing you're in it. But you're not, you're in their laws, their game that they control, and they're the judge. And you're funding it. You're funding it with your cash, you're funding it with giving it your energy. So, 2021. Sanity and goodness has got to be rising from amongst us, the people. Yeah. Lockdown was announced yesterday. I've just been out on a recce. There's nobody locking down in north of England. Okay. Liverpool, they probably are. They're a different kettle of fish now. They're classed as Londoners. But up here in the north, the real England, there's no lockdown going on. So Boris is talking out of his arse. You know, he's talking out of his ring piece. And as I've said often, China boasts a man army of 2 million. That's a lot of people. Yeah, but that's the biggest army. It's 2 million. It's a lot. Blighty boys, what, 125,000 we have. So, Boris is saying to you, do as I tell you, or we're going to screw you. We're going to fine you. We're going to bum you. And we're going to take your kids off you. That's their garbage. And we're going to use his army. We're going to use these officers. Okay, that's what he's saying to you when he's talking to you there. Well, Boris, what is it? Let's say there's 200,000 military men. Let's say you bring a load of Americans in. Let's say you get 500,000 soldiers here on the street. And 2 million of Chinese waiting in the wings under the UN. Well, son, if there's 70 million of us here, as you like to keep throwing out, which we know there's not, and that's just for your nonsense about depopulation. But if 50 million English lads and girlies stood up on the streets, you can have your 2 million army, you can have your Yankee Doodle dandies, you can have them all stood there ready. You don't stand a chance. So what we need to rise in this nation this year is the idea that we all stomp out on the same day, at the same time, across the country, across the world, and show these dicks that are claiming power over the public, the people that pay the very systems that give them a wage, just where they really are at and just how ridiculous they actually are, you know? And, you know, once we get that mechanic going and people are happy to stand up at once, out, on call, out like that, then if there ever comes the day where these guys decide that we're going to start pushing violence, we can annihilate it in an hour and have our country back. So these are the ways we have to start to think. It's not about every man for himself, because they can pick you off easily. Look, I just got arrested. Why? There were two of us there. We caused them enough problems for them to not carry out the stopping of his trading. But they arrested me. But we stopped it. That was just two people. You know, two of us. So this is what I'm saying. It has to be a mindset. Now, I've been out today on the lockdown, and it's clear that up in the north, they're not locking down. People are out. You can see it in the faces. Fuck you, Boris. Fuck you, Boris. That's exactly what they're doing. And that's what's happening. And this is where we need to move this further. And we all need to, we all step out at once and walk towards wherever these tits are. You know, you can see then what's going to happen, yeah? They've got a choice, haven't they? They move back into the realm and what we expect and what we pay for, or they're going to suffer the consequences of an attempt to use violence against millions of people. It's the only way forward, people, now. They can pick you off. If small groups together, they can pick that off, no problem. But when it's en masse, they don't have a chance. So that's what you need to start thinking about now. For this year, let's start moving that mechanic into an actual reality. Yeah? Because that's how militia is and how it should operate. We are the power. We are the people. We are the origin of all trade, of all money. And as we can see, their game is all about removing our ability of exchange so that they can command what we exchange and what we can't exchange. And it's full electronic, which means it has no value. What they're offering you, it's full control, total domination. And the vaccinations, from all what we can see, it's they're inserting a computer mainframe. And bear in mind, people, you've been having polymers put in you since the 60s. It's a E551 as an E number. And it's silicon oxide, if it names itself as it is. And that is quartz at its core. Quartz is a transmitter and receiver. Okay, they've been putting metals in us. We are pretty much loaded up. And that's, if you haven't taken any of the medications, because that's full of it. This is what they're loading you up with. The minute they start turning this 5G on, you're all transmitting and receiving as a basic fact because of the polymer you've got inside you, because of the aluminium, the metals, and etc. And if you've been taking vaccinations, the flu jabs, and medication as a whole, you're in trouble as they up the frequencies on this system. So, there we go. I think I've said more than enough, so I'm going to shut my gob and say, till the next time.